If someone doesn't have the internal reproductive organs but has a vagina, do you think they're a woman?
Of course. And I can even dive into that too. So the monolithic argument for gender is my favorite one. I wouldn't say that a man who was castrated, right, through no fault of his own, he was in a terrific accident and the genitals were ripped off. Of course, he's still a man. But here's why. Because people only develop around 2 pathways. That's it. There's no third sex. There's never going to be a third sex. Nobody alive has ever been able to impregnate themselves, not even chimeras. Because of that, there's only 2 reproductive pathways available, period. You're still a woman. Even if you don't have a uterus, your reproductive pathway was still developed to that of a woman, to that of a female.
But it didn't develop.
It did develop.
Well, a lot of these people who have this condition, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, are those who have XY chromosomes and develop along a male pathway.
No, they develop that. Even if you have XXY, right? Or there are actually men who just have XX, but their reproductive pathway can only be one of 2. They can only develop along 2 reproductive pathways, period, regardless of chromosomes. And that's every human being who exists. Even ones who have the nature of their, the nature of them is ambiguous, right? The ambiguity around genitalia and things like this are ambiguous. They still can only go down one phenotypical pathway, period. And genotypical. So if sex is doing all of the heavy lifting, I think that it is fine for us to point at man and woman and say a man, right, is someone who developed along the reproductive pathway for the production of small gametes, and woman for ova.
Sure.
It doesn't require they have a uterus. They still develop down that pathway, right?
Sure, and that absolutely is a biological definition. But we use those words in other ways, right?
No, we don't.
We don't. When we say well, then how come we can say a woman is manly and the sentence makes sense? Because we're
pointing to masculine or feminine virtues.
Agreed.
Virtues.
But we use those terms to refer to social phenomena, right?
Well, no,
manly,
not always.
Womanly.
Actually, most of the time, right, when you're doing that, there is times when this is done. I agree with you, where you're like, oh, that chick is, or you're nagging me like a woman.
Yeah.
Right.
How many people in the comments right now do you think are calling me a woman?
But the whole point of that, right, is to say that like you're weaker than me or this or that. You're still actually associating this with the sex. You're still associating it with the fact that that's the weaker sex or that's the more dominant sex. Basically, all of those social interactions still revolve around that same idea.
Sure, I haven't denied that.
Yeah, I mean, so they're always pointing, in other words, all extremes for gender are always actually only pointing to 2 things, male, female. That's it. So if that's the case, when we're talking about social roles in society, men and women, male, female, are completely different. I mean, totally different across the board. We're humans, true, right? But everything from our developmental pathway for reproduction, right, to our physical characteristics are completely different. Why in the world would you prescribe a society which didn't bank on the ideas of that and understand that if we are to push the very things which combine our physiology with the social status of people creates a better society? For instance, would you prescribe, like if we're talking about the military, would you prescribe that we had more women in the military than men?
More women than men in the military? Largely probably not, because they don't meet the same standards. And
of course not.
I'm not denying that.
Yeah, of course. So then a failing of courage of men, considering that they have to take on that role, that dominant, but they have to, right? No. They always have to.
No man is obligated to join the military. Therefore, it's not.
Yeah, they are. They can be drafted.
Okay, I don't agree with the draft.
It doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. They can descriptively be drafted, and women can't.
And that's unjust.
That's unjust.
Yes.
Okay, so
there shouldn't be a draft.
So what about police officers, police force? You can be deputized.
Yeah, I think that's no. You shouldn't
that's unjust too.
Yep.
You can be compelled into a posse. That's unjust.
Define. Sorry.
Compelled into a posse, just like you can be compelled into jury duty, right?
Sure, jury duty. I think it's a little bit different because you're not putting yourself in as much harm's way. I don't think that anyone should be conscripted into being a police officer or being that. Because of course there are.
There's always dangers. There's always dangers associated with all of this, including jury duty, right?
And there's going to be a threshold, right? Okay.
Which is what?
We don't know exact. Of course, I don't have to point. Wait, I don't have to point to an exact point to say that there is a difference between sitting on a jury duty and having a gun on you and potentially people shooting at you.
You do if you say that the consistency of the ideology is that you don't believe in this thing because it can put you in harm's way. But this thing also puts you in harm's way.
Significant harm. What do you? What?
Okay. So
fine. Okay. Yeah. Of course. I'm not arguing there's not a threshold, Andrew.
But not just that.
I'm not arguing there's not a threshold.
Let's start with the Titanic. So should the men have given up the lifeboats to the women?
Men giving up the lifeboats to the women?
And the children?
If they were largely stronger, then yes. However, if there was, wait a second, if there was a disabled man, if there was a man who for some reason was weaker, then I think then he should have gone with those people. So it's a strong versus weak, not necessarily along sexed lines. There is a lot of overlap there, but it's not necessary.
Whoa. Okay. So to make sure I got this right, though, you agree with me that the average man is many times stronger than the average woman.
Largely in terms of like upper body strength or something like that, yes.
No, lower body too.
Lower body, yes, because it would depend what you mean by strength, because, for example, like endurance and things of that nature, women in certain cases are stronger in those categories.
What did I say? Average is certain cases now?
Well, I think that women in general are better at endurance running.
No,
I would have to look more into it. I think in certain...
No.
Okay.
On average, they're not. They're not better at anything physical than men. Nothing. Literally nothing. When
Having
you say,
children?
What's really funny about this too is like when you say, well, what about lower body? It is true that proportionally women have stronger lower bodies than men, right? Mm-hmm. For women, proportionally that's true. Men still have much stronger lower bodies than women.
Of course,
it's just that proportional to the size of men versus women.
I'm not arguing that women are physically stronger.
Yeah. So then, if that's the case, aren't you creating a bias in society by saying that the strong, right, should be necessarily like giving up their spots for the weak, when you agree with me that on average, men are going to be much stronger than on average women?
I don't think it's a bias. I think it's people who have certain advantages should use those advantages to help those who are less well off.
Okay.
That would be an example
so
of courage, right?
How would that not disproportionately affect men?